API gateways are a common thing these days. Often, API endpoints have a set of common concerns. Think about things like securing your endpoints, forwarding them to local networks inside your company cloud network, but also rate limiting, applying transformations on requests or responses so they fit better for a certain client app, and so on. Azure API Management allows for all of that and much more. In this section, you will learn all about it. API Management is often seen as Azure's API Gateway solution, which acts as a gateway between consumers of an API and your backend API implementations. But it's actually more than that. It consists of three parts: an API gateway, a management plane, and a developer portal. All three components are fully managed by and hosted on Azure, and various tiers exist, from classic to consumption-based tiers. We will look into those soon. So indeed, as you guessed, in the consumption-based tier, it's considered part of Azure's serverless offering. As it is a platform as a service offering as well, it also comes with and or integrates with what you've come to expect of these Azure offerings by now. It integrates with Entra ID for authentication and authorization. It integrates with Azure Monitor and App Insights for logging, reporting, metrics, tracing, and more. And it also integrates with other Azure services, like Functions, Logic Apps, and the app services we've been looking into. Alright, so let me detail the three main parts a little bit more. The API Gateway component, as mentioned, acts as a gateway between consumers of an API and your backend API implementations. It enables common scenarios you often need when developing and exposing APIs, like routing the incoming requests to the correct downstream API implementations, verifying credentials, like JWT tokens, potentially transforming requests and responses, enforcing rate limits and other quotas, caching if needed, and a variety of monitoring and related scenarios. Then you have the management plane. That is a component used by the company that's providing the API. Used by us, in other words. It's, in fact, just a fancy name for the tools we can use to manage APIs, package, expose, and monitor APIs. In other words, a part of the Azure portal or part of the Azure CLI or other tools. If you're working on the portal to manage APIs, as we will be doing, you're working with the management plane. I will mostly be dealing with the API gateway and the management plane components in this section. Lastly, there's the developer portal. This is an automatically generated website with documentation of the APIs we expose. The idea is that developers that need to integrate with our APIs can use that portal to learn which APIs we expose and learn how to integrate with them. I won't be spending much time on this, but I will show you where you can find it. Just like most Azure services, API management consists of a few key concepts. Depending on who you ask, you'll get different answers on which concepts are key concepts in relation to API management, but personally I think that from the point of view of a developer, there's three key ones. Concept 1. APIs. These are the core of an API management instance. Each one signifies a collection of operations, which are typically linked to the backend services that execute the API. So, the operations correspond to backend operations. For example, you'd have an operation to get the itineraries defined in API management, which corresponds to our getItineraries function. And maybe there's another operation to search for destinations, which is linked to the Search Destinations API endpoint, which we deployed to our app service, and so on. That is all possible because these operations you define in API management are highly customizable. We can control URI mappings, query and path parameters, request and response content, response caching, and more. The second key concept is the product. A product is the means by which APIs are made available to those who need to integrate with them. So a product can include one or more APIs, and it can be open or protected. The third key concept, and the last really important one, according to me at least, is the policy. They can be applied at level of operations, APIs and/or products. Imagine you have a backend API that you want to expose. You may not want to expose it as it was built. Instead, you may want to change the response a bit or modify the request. Things like that are enabled through policies. They allow us to modify the behavior of an API through configuration. So in essence, a policy is a series of statements that are executed in sequence on the request or response of the API. Think about rate limiting, converting between XML and JSON, caching, and so on. So those are the three important concepts. And with that, you should have a good idea of what API management is and what these concepts are and do. Time to dive in. Let's create an API management resource. This will look familiar. The experience of creating Azure resources is kind of similar, no matter which resource you want to create. We want to create an API management or APIM resource. So let's click Create a Resource. And let's search for it. Here it is, the first hit. Let's click Create. The first thing to do is choose a subscription and resource group. I could add that to the travel inspiration resource group. But in my experience, an APIM instance is rarely created for just one functional group of APIs. It's more common to have one that contains a bunch of APIs, regardless of the functionality they offer. Of course, your mileage may vary. So, for this once, I'm going to create a new resource group. I want this to be a bit more generic, so let's name that one AppDev RGDev WE without the functional part. As far as our APIM resource goes, I'm going to name that according to the same principles, so AppDev, followed by APIM for API management, followed by Dev, followed by WE for West Europe. The organization in my case is the name of my company, so Marvin. And the administrator email, that's my email address. The pricing tier, as usual, is quite important. It not only defines computing capacity, cost, how price is calculated, but also the feature set. APIM isn't a very cheap resource to have, so be careful here. There's quite a few tiers that you can choose from. Most notable are the differences in the amount of included API requests and support for more advanced features, like virtual networks and multi-region support. Important to notice here is that there is a consumption-based tier as well, the one on the left here. This one automatically scales and is built by consumption. I'd be inclined to choose this one, as we've been using likewise plans for all the other services. But this time I'm going to divert from that. I'm going to go for the developer pricing tier. The main reason being that I want to be able to show you that developer portal we talked about, and that's not available in the consumption tier. Alright, let's select this one. If it wasn't for wanting to show you that developer portal, I would have chosen the consumption-based tier. Let's click Apply. And let's go to the next tab. Here we can configure monitoring, in other words, log analytics, application insights and the likes. I'm not going to enable that, as it is no different from how it works with other Azure Platform as a Service services, and we already know how to do that. On the next step I can potentially configure the virtual network, but we don't need that. And on the tab after that I can configure the managed identity. Chances are pretty good that we're going to need this, but when we encounter that, I will enable that at that moment. And let's skip on the tags as well. Let's have a look at what we selected. This is all looking good. So let's click Create. Deployment is in progress. While that is happening, let's have a look at how you can create something like this with the Azure CLI, because of course that is also a possibility. The command you're looking for is the AZ APIM command and related, like AZ APIM create to create an instance of API management. So I sped up the clip a bit because deploying an API management resource takes a while, but deployment has succeeded. So let's have a look. We find the typical blade you'd expect from an Azure resource. We've got an overview blade here, we've got tags, identity and access management, but we've also got a set of blades related to monitoring. We also see an APIs blade here. That can be used to manage our APIs. We'll do that soon enough. Next to that, there's the products blade. We also see an API blade here. That can be used to manage our APIs. We'll do that soon enough. And we also see the products blade. Here we can group APIs into products which can then be published to developers. From a single product page, you can then manage product settings, the APIs that are in the product, policies, and a few other things. The subscription blade here is also pretty important. Through it, we can manage API subscriptions, including viewing subscription details, regenerating keys, and managing subscription policies. We will look into this as well. And speaking of policies, the policies I mentioned before as a key concept are not these subscription-related policies. They are products that can be applied to APIs, products, and operations for things like rate limiting, transformations, caching, and so on. We'll have a look at that once we've added an API. So maybe we should do that, right? Let's add an API next.